In section 1A, we talked about impact insulation class. I'm going to go over it again. So impact insulation class deals with the overall sound control that you have over an assembly of architectural components like ceiling, wall, and so on. And you're looking at that overall and looking at a whole set of issues rather than just SCC or NRC. So you're looking at first if the structure vibrates and if it allows for the sound to transmit or vibrate. First vibrate. If you can reduce that vibration. For example, if you have 2x10s at 16 inches on center, can you put cross bracing? It stiffens it up. For example, if you're going from wood, which vibrates more than concrete, can you go to concrete? And then you're looking for reducing solids for the sound to travel through. Remember, sound travels downward and it travels faster through solids. So if you reduce the solids, you're in better shape. For example, if you have, you don't have a direct ceiling, contact ceiling. You actually have a suspended ceiling or furred ceiling. You want to minimize that direct contact from the floor above to the ceiling below, that volume below it. Since the sound travels downward, create sound chutes. These literally like garbage chutes. Sound travels once it hits a solid and it travels downward. Create these channels that take the sound downwards away from the volume that you're concerned with. Use both NRC, noise reduction coefficient, and SCC effectively to control your impact insulation class. Let's take a look at some of these components. Here we have just a typical wood construction ceiling. So we have 2x10s, 2x12s at 16 inches on center or 24 inches on center. Gypsum wallboard, we have wood flooring up above, tongue and groove, and so on. Look at the INR. INR is like impact insulation class, IIC. It's just the numbers are different. So as you look at it, you'll see it's in the negatives. As soon as I use concrete, reduces vibration, it improves it by one number. As soon as I have a furred ceiling, so you see the C channels, it goes substantially. I'm reducing the direct contact of the solids. Remember, sound travels much slower through the air versus solids. So by spacing it, I'm getting it better. Now, if you go concrete and you have drop ceiling, would that improve it? Yeah, not a whole lot. So, but it does improve it. Now watch how it improves it substantially. I go to the source of the sound and I try to stop it. I put carpeting on the top so the little girl upstairs doesn't tap dance. Now if I combine, watch from 5, I go to 25. Now I combine all of these. I combine concrete flooring, put the carpeting, furred ceiling, preferred is suspended ceiling. You go through the whole 9 yards, you get to 26. So if you want to improve the system, you essentially start off with basic understanding of it and improve it one bit at a time, and you'll see the difference. And be very careful that, with this, you want to immediately come back and change that surfacing. We changed it to carpet. Provide for a stiffer material that doesn't vibrate. So go from wood to concrete. Create separate cells so they don't touch each other. So create some kind of a channel ceiling, suspended ceiling, or something like that. Suspended ceiling works really well. Minimizes the direct contact. Use insulation for, it's fuzzy. It actually absorbs the sound. Use any kind of ceiling tile that improves NRC as well as SDC. But on top of it, be very mindful of flanking paths. So if you do all of that work and you have paths where the sound is going to sneak through and travel, then you're actually in trouble. So think about where you have air ducts, wrap them with insulation, make sure that insulation is not going to get damaged and it's effective, and make sure you have any holes through the walls for various reasons. You need to take care of it. So we want to be very aware and mindful of that. Now we're going to go through ceiling types. Just Just very simple and basic. Contact directly attaching the ceiling to the structure. Most residential projects are like that. We attach the gypsum wall, we're directly to the cathedral ceiling, to the roof rafters. Third, ceiling. We want to create some distance, and we may want to create that distance because if we just had a cathedral ceiling, we need our airspace, we need our 11 inches of bad insulation. So if we put our ceiling lights, it's going to squish that insulation. So we can't have that. Therefore, we actually have another ceiling, third ceiling, so that we can actually have additional space so we can place our lights, recessed lights, for example. And remember, the depth is 7 inches, so you need to ferret for 7 inches if you don't want it to impact your insulation. Approximately 7 inches, because remember, you can do a little bit of insulation up above it. Otherwise, you essentially lose all of the insulation over this area. So if you're getting sun and the light source is creating heat, so you got double whammies, you got problem because you're not getting protection against that heat on the outside. So keep in mind that some types of lights actually would like you to frame around it and put some rigid insulation so that there's no concern with fire, because remember, bad insulation catches fire really easily and it's movable. So you want to box around it so that's not possible. Now, some light fixtures have a double box, so that the actual box is one and then it has another box. So it protects you, gives you that separation that you're actually looking for. Now, when you're designing your lights, be very careful. A lot of times we have sprinkle of lights. Be very careful. There's nothing worse than having sprinkle of recessed lights that look ugly on the ceiling and gives you lighting in the places you don't want to have. So have a reflected ceiling plan. What's a reflected ceiling plan? It's a floor plan essentially, which is essentially showing a ceiling upside down, looking down at the interior of that ceiling, so you can actually see the coordination of the lighting with the furniture and the switches where the switches are taking place. So we then say for the typology of those ceiling types, the typology of the ceiling types that we were actually going, the next is suspended as well as interstitial. Let's go over the suspended ceiling just for a second. So for suspended ceiling, it's typical like what we have in the classroom. We usually have a grid very similar to what you see in this image. In that grid, you have these wires that come with the cross tees, which essentially is this grid that supports the panels. It's the most efficient, it's very inexpensive to do this, and it's easy to replace these acoustic panels. And so the system works like this. So the panels are essentially placed over here. They can be removed by just simply tilting them. They cannot withstand moisture, and they get dirty after several years. You can simply replace them as needed and go from one to another. Don't get cutesy. When you have these recessed types, remember that edge is very hard to maintain. This material is extremely brittle. So if you're not careful, you can easily chip all of these. And be very careful not to get too fancy with that. Certainly do not do this, because that defeats the purpose of the suspended ceiling, with the acoustic ceiling being so easy to remove it, because you have to slide every single one, and then the very last row you have to provide for room so that you can access that area. Essentially, as I said, you have this grid of crosties that provide support for your ceiling. When you are placing your support, think earlier on in terms of where the connection is going to take place, how you're going to attach it to the ceiling, and where the lighting is going to be, and if you have enough support to provide for the weight of the light. Usually these ceiling lights are very, very light, but if you have chandelier, you have to actually provide for that heavier lighting effect. So when you are designing your reflected ceiling plan, you want to think about sizing and pattern, particularly the edges. Remember, you're going to look at that ceiling, you're going to see the edges. And remember, this material is brittle. It's very hard to cut in small, very thin layers. So think about how it meets the panels, meet the corners and the edges, particularly long edges. Think about sound insulation, NRC, STC, IIC. Since fire height arises, think about fire and fire safing. Think about the support that you need to provide for the ceiling, as well as the lighting, as well as the sprinkler system. So think about the support for the ceiling itself, lighting, and the sprinkler system. Make sure that your lighting and the sprinkler system do not cross or get in the way of each other. So I'm going to stop this lecture and then get back on with it. This is Unit 4.1b.